Hello, everyone. Welcome to CXO Spice Talk. Today's topic is mobility. Our special guest today is Jason Inskeep, Director of 5G Center of Excellence at AT&T Business. So welcome, Jason. Thank you for being on the CXO Spice Talk.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me today.
So Jason, you are Director of 5G Center of Excellence for AT&T Business. You speak around the world on the topic of 5G. You actually lead people pushing the boundaries of how people communicate. You are actually authoring the framework for the AT&T methodology toward private cellular. So top of mind for all of us, what kind of phone do you have?
Oh yeah, funny one, right? The short answer is an iPhone 13, but the funnier answer is I had an iPhone 8 until December. Right, I don't change very often, but was at a social event with some colleagues and our partners were there as well, and I was getting picked on by a peer of mine. Thank you, Tony Leggio, for pushing me, and my wife and others for finally pushing me to make the change from an old device to now the new 5G device.
Funny, that's one thing you and I have in common. I just upgraded to iPhone 13 from iPhone 6, right? And because
you beat me.
Yes. Yeah. So what is one word, a small business or mid-sized business or large enterprise might use to describe 5G?
The word I like is convergence, right? I mean, it's
Love that.
the way 5G is built, the way it's structured, the way it's changed. It creates now the opportunity to fully converge with the wired side, right? And as you start thinking about experiences, it's not just what we do on the cellular side, it's the end-to-end. That's what the enterprises care about. That's what it just works, right? And it works in a way that is driving next generation experiences and even the experiences of the day. So, and to get that, convergence has to happen technically,
Love that.
operationally, et cetera.
I can't think of a better word to describe that, so thank you. And how do you see the adoption rate going for 5G in the United States as well as globally?
That's layers of an answer, I think, in terms of what you look at. You've got the consumer view, which, hey, how fast are users picking up a 5G device from whichever carrier that they're going to grab? And then what does that mean in terms of which spectrum bands deployed? How is that talking to, the air quotes edge constructs? You've got maybe a cloud view. That's how are they restructuring and thinking about not just application or data computing, but network computing, right? In terms of mixing, and back to that convergence topic again, you have different regulatory bodies in different countries that are taking, stance on when and how they're deploying or allowing not regulatory, but enterprises and carriers to deploy spectrum. So you've got layers of kind of adoption, and then you've got definition, right? I look at what you're doing, what we can do on the private cellular space, and what we're doing in particular. And there's a lot of depth there already, and a continued roadmap that's growing on top of it. At the same token, you've got this growing space in the macro world when you think about connected car and the work we're doing with some of our partners there, and how that ties into not just the table stakes disconnection, but also how it ties out. And if you think about it, some of the adoption of the things we're doing with 5G are glad we had 5G, right? We were talking earlier about, with COVID and what's happening there, and, the ability of some of the changes that not just 5G, but networks in general have allowed, and what happened overnight, right? From 80% in the office to 80% at home or more, right? And how that, needed to be not just wireless, but all connectivity thought process had to be changed. But the one that had been the most rigid in the past was cellular, and with 5G, that flexibility is very interesting. So I probably tiptoed around your question, because there's a lot of layers to what the adoption rate is depending on your lens. So.
Yeah, you're right on. It's fascinating to see how much we have evolved, right? And it's just amazing progress. Let's look at a specific use case. Say I'm a scaling mid-sized manufacturer near Chicago. I have 255 or 250 employees and $100 million in revenue. What can I do now because of 5G that I could not do before?
As an enterprise, right, the first thing that I saw early on with 5G, and I feel like I'm ancient in the 5G space, right? I started jumping into this 17-ish, right? And of course, our labs folks were working on a lot earlier than that when I think about some of my peers there. And we quickly saw that 5G is an enterprise network, right? It's the opportunity back to convergence to give that end-to-end experience, that visibility from origin to destination, which will allow you to get to that next gen experience. So I look at a customer like this that, maybe was looking at their version of Industry 3.0 or their version of 4.0 and saying, what is that next X.0? What does that next generation look like for me? And, typically it's automation, right? It's getting, bottom line, getting more out of the bottom line while driving the top line. So that's inside, right? And just some of the immediate step change that happens with, adding a cellular layer at a more privatized model that are taking shape. The next thing, at least we try to think about, again, from this end-to-end topology perspective, is what happens when the widget leaves, right? And that widget could be the person, that person could be the truck, that person could be, the supplier coming in and picking up, right? So what is that interaction, not just with the inside, but with the outside, and then to the next hub, to the next hub, to the next hub, right? So what we think about that for the manufacturer, and it's a little overwhelming, all of the things that they can take advantage of in terms of scaling and the opportunities that are there. But it's important for them to now say, you can really say, hey, let use case drive connectivity, right? And when I say use case, it's the first thing is don't always go after that, digital twin or that's a North Star kind of thing, right? But there's a lot of building blocks that you've got to get in place before you can hit the North Star, right? Some data that's got to be collected from users, devices, and things. And then ultimately, how does that play into the bigger world? At the end of the day, there's a lot of options that have now presented themselves that are going to be immediate step change, right? In terms of what they've been doing before. But how do they get to return on value and get it in a way that, gives immediate and over time? Those are the challenges we're trying to think through now to not only make it easier to understand, but also give this manufacturer an opportunity to get something right now, right? So near-term value could be just seeing one site that just being able to keep their technicians from having to walk around and write things down was enough value in comparison to alternatives to make the move, right?
Yeah, I love your advice to tie whatever initiative we have, technology initiative, to the business value, because that's so critical. And then also look at the low-hanging fruit first before you go boil the ocean, right? So, okay, that's now really digging into how technology impacts real people. Talk about private 5G, because I think there's a lot of confusion around this topic today. What does that mean when people say private 5G, right? How does organization know if they fit the profile for private 5G?
Oh, we look at it first from a data model, right? And this gets into the methodology you referenced earlier, right? So the first thing we're trying to think about in private, a lot of conversations on it, a lot of interest and curiosity in it, and a lot of buzzwords in it that we wanted to get to the source of the value or lack thereof, right? And it starts with, what's the site type, right? Indoor, outdoor, urban, suburban, subgroup inside of a space, right? You think of retail store in a mall versus a refinery in the middle of nowhere versus an airport, right? All of those have different characteristics from a site type alone, right? Size, square footage, what is the noise around it, what's the space in general. That'll give you a good indication pretty quickly of what your capital could be. Because remember, if I'm going to build this out, like you can't have holes in it, right? It's got to cover everything. Your capital costs in that place are the first thing you're thinking about. But then we're trying to rationalize that, not yet with user groups, but with the data owner, right? So in that construct, it's who is the data creator, who is the data owner, right? If you're in a refinery, the data creator is the refinery, the data owner is the refinery. Thus, therefore, they can choose the solution that makes the most sense with a C and an S, right? Now, the nuances of what that is, in terms to your question, can vary based on, shared spectrum has these characteristics, which will impact performance this way. Licensed spectrum has these characteristics, it'll operate this way. Multi-site will operate one way or another way, depending on how we architect the cores, right? So all of these things that really we've done at a macro level, right, to really simplify your answer, we're boiling down to a micro level. And now with new partnerships that we've had an existing suite for 3 or 4 years now, and now we start to round that out with our recent announcements to NWC with Microsoft, and how we take, now we've got small site solution, large site solution, combo spectrum solutions, because at the end of the day, the oil of any private cellular network is spectrum, right? And we've tried to take our early hypothesis was, even before CBRS was a mystery, right? We were sitting back saying, how do I give the best of Wi-Fi and the best of cellular inside a domain? Wi-Fi, you got ultimate control, right? You control all the widgets and everything with it, except for spectrum. On the cellular side, licensed spectrum plus the reliability and inherent stability built in. Those two was how our hypothesis worked, and we fit the solutions around it, which we find very advantageous to customers, because whether you're in a refinery or you're in the airport, the architecture is the same, but how you manage the user groups and data on top of it varies. Airports, consumers, multi-businesses, that sort of thing. Got to manage that a little different. Got to think about access for all. In the refinery, what is the best solution at the optimal cost to cover that entire space that will also help me connect to my next refinery in terms of the supply chain, right? So you get these basic kind of theories that we work through, and then private is a construct of the user group in space. If that makes sense. Speaking
of that, it can be quite complex, right? And I would say, I know AT&T has a professional service group, and I would strongly recommend the engagement with professionals who've been there, done that, rather than just go try to figure it out by yourself in the first place. But that's very meaningful advice. Thank you. What about rural areas? How is 5G enhanced mobile broadband, SpaceX, and other emerging rural broadband measuring up in terms of cost, performance, reliability versus cable modem or fiber access?
I mean, king at the end of the day is fiber. If you can get a wire on everything, that's the best connection you're going to get, at least in the near term, right? Obviously, putting a wire on every device is kind of defeats the purpose of being mobile, obviously, for obvious reasons. So then it's how close can I get the radio to a density that supports the maximum number of devices at a cost point that makes the most sense, again, with a C, right? So as I look at that density, you've got new spectrum options that have come up with CBRS, creating new enablement methods. You've got initiatives like FirstNet with us that, we're not only doing it because we want to make money for consumers, we're doing it to help our first responders, right? And as we're building that out, you create the fiber backbone to look at either, again, using cellular as your final last inch on whatever spectrum's available, or bring the wire to the house, right? And because if you look at the decay process of, say, a fixed wireless device over a broadband, a hardwired modem, it's going to be different, right? And that experience and time to decay will be different. So the more we can get the wire to them, the better. That's not to say we don't use mobile broadband either, because now those speeds and performances, again, still broadband, right? Let's not compare it to MPLS or something like that. They're getting closer. Then as you add in for especially enterprises and things like this, you start getting in networks license. Now I can give more guarantee to it. Ultimately, you're going to have needs for things like SpaceX, satellite, and other things where the cost of fiber, microwave, other things just don't exist. But we need to get broadband everywhere, if for nothing else. Think about what happened with COVID, right? I mean, you had to be home. Schools weren't closed. So how do we maximize that? And then, of course, federal funding and things of those nature that are starting to help fuel that, not only deployment, but back to the conversation before, give them the money to go figure out the complexity themselves, right? And bring partners along like our consulting team and others to help, shape that. What does it look like, sort of topology?
Yeah, that's really important. Business resiliency is on top of everyone's mind these days, especially, right? After going through 2 years of pandemic. I recently wrote a blog about it. What do you think about this? What is the correlation between a mobile strategy with business resiliency?
Didn't expect what happened a few years back. I mean, it just, challenges of the world, and, the good news of it is, right, cellular 5G in particular, it was helpful, right? Because you had the ability, just like we talked about before with broadband, in definitely urban locations, world gets tough, right? It's tough. We got to figure it out, right? But when you look at urban locations, suburban locations, you could go Wi-Fi at home, but then you had all your family members maybe doing something, spouses in another room doing something, kids playing games, being on Zoom calls for work, school, whatever. and you're clogging it up. So you had to get creative, right? And the innovation just happened rapidly, right? Because we all came together to try to figure out, and mobility definitely helped that resilience, because you could say, okay, your broadband network is for everybody else. Now you're running like a home version of SD-WAN, right? With cellular as the primary backhaul for the office. I mean, we kind of whispered about that in the past, but we didn't really talk about it heavily because you still went to the office. So necessity drove change probably a lot faster maybe than we thought, even though it, probably would have happened either way, but necessity pushed it faster. So in one sense, lucky we had those changes when we did. And another way, it helped accelerate things maybe as a positive on the other side of it. And it's starting to tell us now what we can really, where our limitations may or may not be as we continue forward. So.
Absolutely. I do agree with you. Necessity really forced changes and accelerated changes, right? And, I noticed that you'll be a panelist at the upcoming Enterprise Connect next week. Yes. Monday morning. So what will be the biggest takeaway we can expect from your talk, mobility update, sizing up 5G in the real world?
I think probably one of the biggest secrets that we hope we can be more loud about now is we've put together a pretty comprehensive suite of services in the private 5G space, right? We have about 3 or 4 different ones that all can stand alone or can work together. And again, it's all trying to solve that control and spectrum challenge, right? Because, you need capacity, but you need control. And, the spectrum laws help govern how that happens. And we've put a lot of thought using, and I think you mentioned before about me writing the methodology. No, it's not me. It's taking the stuff that our guys, just translating the stuff that our super PhDs know well inside out. Just translating that into a version that is, consumable with the customer, right? That's what I did. I didn't do anything special. I just looked at, this is the work that we've done for 25 years. Hey, shrink it, let the customer take advantage of it. That's that convergence piece we talked about before. So really for me is, want to get that message out to customers, let them know that, hey, if you're just getting into this world, there's a lot of opportunity. And with that opportunity comes, hey, how do I get to Goldilocks? And that's what we wanted to help with.
Yeah, you're really humble, Jason. Today's environment is not lack of information, is that how do you really extract the information, turn that into, tie that to business value, make it very meaningful to all the business. So it is not that you're not doing, you're doing a lot. AT&T is one of the 4 largest US mobile carriers forming the NextG Alliance, and it sounds like such great synergy and collaboration. And can you tell us a little bit more about what the alliance is up to, and then other companies are involved, and then how the NextG Alliance will impact the 6G evolution for all of us?
Oh, first, I've got so much still to do with 5G. It's still dawn of that, right? But started seeing some of the things being thought about when you look at 6G. Really higher spectrum bands, cellular in space, things. I mean, because we're starting to, we're not only pushing the technology future on Earth, we're starting to push into space, right? With SpaceX and things like that are happening real time. So using higher spectrum bands, terahertz bands, things like that, and how do they look from a spectrum perspective? Different ways to use spectrum, because that's a finite resource, right? And I think those are the big areas that we have to tackle in 5G, because it's a finite resource. Devices are only more and more coming on. But can we do that from a technology perspective, pushing the laws of not only technology, but physics itself, right? And I think quantum and AI and all that stuff comes together. Those are the kind of things we've got to think about. Spectrum, protect it, but scale it at the same time. And to me, that's probably going to be a big focus. I'm not directly involved, but the stuff I see and hear, it's got to be on how we optimize the spectrum.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your vision and wisdom with us today, Jason. My actually biggest takeaway from our conversation is that pandemic actually became a catalyst, right, for organizations to move mobile investment to new use cases. With 5G comes mobile solutions that define how business is conducted today, right? Inspiring meaningful engagement in almost unimaginable ways. And for example, customer messaging where and when needed, real-time communication with team members, regardless of where they are at. And then much greater uptime, regardless of where people work, or mobile security, minimizing risk. And then there's augmented reality that deepens experiential impact, right? There's a vehicle to everything communication, 24/7 access to information tailored to the schedule and lifestyle of real people. So, we also heard about metaverse, right? There's augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, AI, and cognitive. All these use cases are fascinating. So, however, for the resilient enterprises, you said creating a fluid workforce means prioritizing your team, embracing a mobile strategy, right, as a first step for remote and hybrid workers so that it can become productive, connected. And then thank you, AT&T Business, for sponsoring this episode of CXO Spice Talk. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Stay hungry, stay bold, and stay grateful.